Deputy Daly.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, what should have been a routine assessment of the activities and expenditure of the scheme was used by Judge Harding Clark to be turned into a vitriolic assault on the victims of this barbaric procedure. I think it is abhorrent, it is shameful and should be withdrawn. The Justice, in her remarks, went way beyond her remit, made accusations without evidence. The report was flawed in its objectivity, full of conjecture, and really raises serious concerns about the whole scheme. Now, let's be clear here. There would never have been a scheme at all if the women and their advocates had not got up and campaigned over years to demand justice and accountability for what happened to them. The scheme themselves, when it was put in place, was roundly warned about by members on this side of the House as being inadequate in the manner in which it was structured. Other deputies have made those points. It was an abysmal scheme, and the types of awards that were covered by it for a lifetime of pain and hardship were minuscule, and the numbers given. I'm obviously glad that the women received something, but Judge Harding Clark got more in a year than those women did for a lifetime of suffering. Other deputies have made the points. 20 days to apply. The methodology for the burden of proof was flawed, relying on documentary evidence. The scheme actually allowed for oral evidence. Judge Harding Clark chose not to do that, and the scheme really made awards without liability. It was an expression of regret without responsibility, and it is just not on. Now, I think the report by the Midwives for Choice is an excellent critique of the report, and they point out that it's characterised by a reticence to present actual figures, using vague generalisations instead of key findings, as though keeping the reader in the dark, indeed, and that such an absence of transparency and proximity to objective scientific standards at any level means that they don't recognise any contribution to the body of knowledge on symphysiotomy. And they are correct, and that the Minister sought to claim in his introductory remarks that this narrative added to our understanding of symphysiotomy clearly demonstrates to me that he has not read it, because the data, the methodology for establishing symphysiotomy and the disability was completely inappropriate and unscientific, and I would challenge the Minister to read it, because in fairness, Midwives for Choice make the point about the challenges faced by the judge in the absence of objective evidence due to inconsistencies across medical records, birth registers, annual clinical reports and so on. But they make the point, irrespective of these challenges, there was an onus on the judge to do justice to the best of her ability to the women who had put their faith in her, and the failure to acknowledge the limitations of the scheme's methodology in favour of branding honest and responsible elderly women as false claimants and setting an arbitrary diagnostic bar in full knowledge of the impossibility of women reaching it, whose symphysis pubis had reapproximated over time, is far from the justice to which these women are entitled. And it is irresponsible, and the media coverage was irresponsible and hurtful. The 800-page report devotes just 82 pages to the scheme. The rest is the judge and her bizarre opinions, and it's not for the first time. We know that she wrote to some of the complainants, and language is important, telling women to treat themselves with the women, commiserating about their unhappy experience. She wrote to me and Deputy Wallace in terms which, to me, were like the ravings of a lunatic. They certainly weren't the words of a competent, independent assessor. Bizarre language, and that bizarre language and inference and her own ideology is seeping through this report. It is a defence and a whitewashing of the state's involvement in barbaric practices which have been condemned by international human rights organisations. It utterly should be withdrawn, and this issue will not rest. And I end on the point, Ceann Comhairle, that the questions asked by Deputy O'Sullivan about the critique of this report, the scientific critique, must be answered by the Minister and the Department.
Thank you, Deputy Daly.